The Dust Eaters. How do you mourn a death when the dead don't stay buried? Alara knelt, her knees sinking into the dry, cracked earth. The heat of the twin suns was a brutal weight on her back, shimmering off the red-baked plains and turning the distant mesas into mirages. In her hands, she held a small, polished stone, smooth as a riverbed. It wasn't a marker for the person buried beneath her, not truly. It was a weight, an anchor to keep them from rising again. The earth trembled faintly, a tremor she felt more in her bones than in the ground itself. It was the hum of the city, miles away, pulling sustenance from the planet's core, and sometimes it was the sound of the dead struggling to get free. She placed the stone on the spot where the dirt had been freshly turned. The grave belonged to her grandfather. Only yesterday, he had been laughing, his calloused hands sorting through a new harvest of sun-dried tubers. Now, he was a silent presence, and Alara's heart felt like that same, polished stone, heavy and unmoving in her chest. A thin, high-pitched wail cut through the silence. Not human. It was the sound of a dust eater, a scavenger drawn to the scent of a new grave. It was a monstrous, six-legged thing, and it meant trouble. They were harmless to the living, but they could burrow into the ground with alarming speed, disturbing the resting places of the dead and inviting the worst kind of trouble. Alara rose, her hand instinctively going to the small, rusted blade at her belt. She was alone, a fact that settled over her like a shroud. The family had gone, a caravan of covered wagons disappearing into the horizon with a trail of kicked-up dust. They'd given her a choice, but she couldn't leave, not while her grandfather still lay beneath this cursed soil. The wailing grew louder, closer. A patch of earth 30 feet away began to churn and froth, a cloud of red dust erupting as the dust eater clawed its way to the surface. Its segmented body, the color of a fresh bruise, was a horrifying sight. Alara knew she had to act, and fast. The dust eater was not the problem. The dead were the problem. The thought of her grandfather, the man who had taught her to read the stars and tell stories by firelight, rising as a mindless, stumbling husk was a horror she could not bear. He had asked her, in his last moments, to ensure he had his rest, and Alara intended to keep that promise. She would keep him anchored to this land, no matter the cost. With a battle cry torn from her throat, she charged. Her blade was meant for carving wood, but today, it would have to do for slicing through chitin. It was a race against time, a desperate effort to drive the creature away before its burrowing reached the grave. She could feel the ground trembling beneath her, not just from the city, but from something far more immediate, far more threatening. Something was waking, and she was the only one standing between it and the person she loved most. This is a great request. The previous response was the first chapter of a novel. Following further means to continue the story. I'll provide the next chapter, building on the initial hooks and raising the stakes even higher. Chapter 2. The dust eater's mandibles clicked, a sound like dry twigs snapping as it reared up. Its 6 legs, each tipped with a razor-sharp claw, dug into the red dirt. Alara's makeshift blade felt pitifully small against its bulk. She feinted left, forcing the creature to shift, then plunged the blade into the soft flesh of its underbelly. A high-pitched shriek, more enraged than pained, ripped from its throat. The creature bucked, flinging Alara aside. She landed hard, the air knocked from her lungs, her head striking a sun-baked stone. For a moment, the world was a dizzying blur of red sky and hot dust. The dust eater, wounded but not defeated, scuttled towards the fresh grave, its long snout twitching. It wasn't after a fight. It was after the scent of the newly deceased. It was a race against a clock she couldn't see, but could feel in the thrumming of the earth. The dead don't stay buried. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. He had spent his life fighting against the inevitable, anchoring the departed with rituals and stones and an unyielding faith in the finality of death. He was a keeper of the lost, a whisperer to the earth. She was his apprentice, but she had only half his knowledge and a quarter of his courage. Scrambling to her feet, she saw the dust eater's head was already halfway into the ground, a churning vortex of dust and pebbles surrounding it. She didn't have time to kill it. She had to stop it. She scanned the desolate landscape. The only thing of any use was the polished stone she'd placed on the grave. It was a memory stone, meant to hold a piece of the deceased spirit, to bind them to the earth and prevent the rising. But it wasn't a physical weight. It was a key. Diving towards the grave, she grabbed the stone. Its smooth surface was warm with the sun's heat. The Dust Eater's tail, a spiny whip of hardened chitin, lashed out and caught her across the thigh. A searing pain flared, but she ignored it, clutching the stone tight. The ground was shaking now, violently. The hum from the distant city was a frantic thrumming. Alara knew what it meant. The city was a monument to the living, powered by the core of a dying planet. But it was also a magnet, drawing in the life force of everything around it, even the dead. Her grandfather's spirit was being pulled, not by the Dust Eater, but by the hungry heart of the city itself. And then she saw it. A hand, a gaunt, dust-caked hand, clawing its way up through the soil where she had just placed the stone. It wasn't a Dust Eater that was disturbing the grave, it was what lay beneath. Her grandfather was rising. A guttural moan, a sound she hadn't heard since she was a child, came from the ground. Not the wail of a creature, but the broken, rasping gasp of something that should not have been. Alara knew the ritual. She knew the words her grandfather had taught her, the ones that could bind a spirit to the land and give it peace. But she also knew the risk. The ritual required a sacrifice, a piece of the living to anchor the dead. And the ground was shifting, a full-body tremor now, as the buried hand flexed and reached for the air. She had to make a choice. A terrible, immediate choice. Use the memory stone to bind him, and risk losing a part of herself forever, or step aside and watch her grandfather become another one of the countless stumblers that roamed the desolate plains. The hand, a mirror of the one that had taught her to tell stories by firelight, was almost free. It was reaching for her. And in that moment, she finally understood what her grandfather had meant when he said, "The only true peace is the one you make with the dust." Chapter 3. The choice was no choice at all. It was a promise. Alara didn't hesitate. As the hand broke free of the dirt, its fingers trembling with a desperate, mindless hunger, she pressed the memory stone against her own chest. The polished surface was hot, but the moment it touched her skin, a searing cold shot through her, deeper than any chill. She whispered the words, a litany her grandfather had taught her for just this purpose. They were ancient, a language of stone and sorrow. Flesh to dust, memory to earth. May the roots hold you now and evermore. A thin, pulsing light emanated from the stone, a faint blue glow against the red of the landscape. It wasn't the sun's light. It was a part of her, a thread being pulled from her heart and woven into the very fabric of the stone. The sacrifice was not blood, but something far more precious. She felt a piece of herself unravel, a sensation she couldn't name, a sound she couldn't recall. She clutched the stone tighter, the light growing brighter. The cold spread, numbing her from the inside out. A single, crystalline memory, precious and profound, was being siphoned away. It was the memory of his laugh. The way it rumbled in his chest when he told a joke, how it sounded like wind chimes made of glass and bone. The specific, unique music of his joy was what the ritual demanded. As the memory faded, so too did the hand. Its fingers, reaching for the open air, curled inward. The gaunt knuckles, already turning to dust, retreated back into the earth. The trembling of the ground subsided, leaving behind only the distant, steady hum of the city. The Dust Eater, its purpose gone, scuttled away into the vast plains, a dark shadow disappearing against the red earth. Silence returned, a silence more complete than the one that had existed before. Alara knelt over the grave, her chest aching with a hollow, unfillable space. She held the stone, now pulsing with a steady, warm light, and placed it back on the grave. It was an anchor, a tombstone made of her own memory. She felt empty. The loss wasn't a sudden shock, but a gradual, numbing sorrow. She tried to recall the sound of his laugh, to summon it in her mind, but all she found was a void. She knew he had laughed. She remembered the sight of his face, crinkled with mirth. But the sound, the feeling of it, was gone. It was the price of his rest. As the last rays of the setting sun turned the mesas a deep purple, Alara stood. Her family was gone. The grave was sealed. Her promise was kept. But the ache in her chest, the missing piece of her soul, burned hotter than any sun. The city, It was the source of this rot, the thing that devoured the dead and forced them to rise as stumblers. Her grandfather had always said it was an abomination, a mockery of life itself. He had fought it with rituals and memory stones. But Alara knew now that ritual wasn't enough. Her mind was made up. She had to understand. She had to find the source of the city's power, to confront the machine that was stealing the dead. She would go there, to the shimmering spires she had only ever seen from a distance, and demand her memory back, leaving the newly settled grave behind. With its single, glowing stone, Alara turned her back on the home she had always known. With a new purpose forged in grief and a profound, personal loss, she started walking. Chapter 4. The journey was a slow, agonizing crawl across the desolate plains. The twin suns, a brutal, crimson star and its smaller, cooler blue companion, beat down on the red earth, their light making the air shimmer. Alara walked with the dust. It wasn't a choice, it was an inevitability. It clung to her clothes, coated her skin, and rose with every footfall, a fine, red powder that tasted of iron and loss. For 2 days, she saw nothing but the cracked ground and the occasional skeletal scrub brush, its branches like bony fingers grasping for a life long gone. Her water skin was half empty, her stomach a hollow drum. But the hunger and thirst were a distant ache compared to the new void in her chest, the place where her grandfather's laugh had once lived. She would stop sometimes, close her eyes, and try to conjure it, but all she found was silence. It was the price of his rest, and a burden she had chosen to bear. On the 3rd day, the land began to change. The ground, once flat and unbroken, started to rise and fall in gentle, rolling hills. In the distance, the first signs of something unnatural appeared. They were not mesas or rock formations, but strange, geometric shapes jutting from the earth, their surfaces polished and unnaturally smooth. Alara knew what they were. They were the city's outcroppings, the veins of a mechanical heart that pumped life into the metropolis at the cost of the land around it. Her grandfather had warned her about them. "They're a whisper from the city," he'd said. "A promise of water and cool air that will always demand a toll." The air grew heavy with a new scent, ozone and something metallic, like burnt copper. She saw the first stumbler just before dusk. It was a woman, or what had been a woman. Her clothes were tattered remnants, her skin the same color as the dust. It moved with a lurching, uneven gait, its head tilted to one side, as if listening for a voice that would never come. It was one of the countless souls who had been pulled from their rest, unable to anchor themselves to the land. Alara felt a wave of cold dread. This was her grandfather's potential fate, the cost of her promise. She hid behind a low ridge, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had heard stories of the stumblers, but she had never seen one up close. They were not aggressive, not in the way a dust eater was. They were simply lost. They wandered the plains, forever searching, forever pulled towards the city that had stolen their peace. She watched as it stumbled on, a silent, tragic figure in the fading light. As night fell, the stars appeared, a brilliant tapestry in the ink-black sky. But tonight, a new star shone, a bright, pulsating light on the horizon. It was the city, a beacon of cold, artificial light, its towers and spires piercing the heavens. It was a monument to the living built on the backs of the dead. Alara unrolled her blanket and lay down. The ground was cold. She pulled the worn cloth tight around her shoulders, but no amount of warmth could fill the emptiness inside her. She looked at the light of the city, so close now, and felt a burning resolve. She would not just walk into it. She would not become another lost soul. She would find a way to stop it. And then, she would find a way to get her memory back. Chapter 5. The dawn broke cold and gray, a stark contrast to the days before. The air had a new thickness to it, a subtle hum that vibrated in Alara's teeth. The geometric spires of the city were no longer just a distant light. They were a presence on the horizon, a cluster of impossible angles and shimmering surfaces that seemed to defy the rules of the natural world. She packed her meager belongings, a water skin, a pouch of dried tubers, and a rusted blade. The memory stone, a small, polished comfort in her pocket, was her only connection to her grandfather now. She touched it, feeling the faint warmth it radiated. The stone felt heavier today, a weight she knew she'd carry forever. As she drew closer to the city's periphery, the terrain became even more alien. The red dust gave way to a hardened, metallic ground, and the sparse vegetation disappeared entirely, replaced by strange, crystalline formations that grew from the surface like jagged, frozen tears. This was the Deadlands, a region where the city's pull was strongest, a graveyard for the souls too weak to resist its call. She saw dozens of stumblers now. They were everywhere, a silent, shuffling herd. They paid her no mind, their heads bowed, their movements slow and uncoordinated. Some were little more than skeletons wrapped in rags, their bones clicking with every step. Alara felt a pang of profound sadness. These were once people, with lives and loves and laughter, now reduced to this. Among them, she saw something else, a figure that was not a stumbler. It moved with purpose, its form obscured by a long, hooded cloak. This figure was not shuffling, it was walking, its feet crunching on the crystallized ground. The figure stopped near a large, glowing crystal and knelt, its hands moving in a precise, practiced way. A new scent filled the air, not of ozone, but of something sweet and earthy. It was the smell of life, a strange and welcome aroma in this desolate place. The hooded figure was a siphon. Alara's grandfather had spoken of them with a mixture of fear and respect. Siphons were the city's servants, sent out to collect the life force of the Deadlands, to harvest the power that the stumblers had lost. They were the bridge between the two worlds, the living and the dead. Alara's heart pounded. She had to know more. This siphon might hold the key to understanding the city's power. She crept closer, her movements as silent as the dust. As she drew near, she saw the siphon's hand was not gloved, but was instead a polished, metallic extension of its arm, its fingers ending in small, needle-like tips. It plunged its hand into the glowing crystal, and the crystal's light dimmed, its energy flowing into the siphon. The figure turned its head, and for a terrifying moment, Alara thought it had seen her. But its gaze was not on her. It was fixed on the distant city, its eyes glowing with a faint, internal light, like embers in a furnace. The siphon was not human, not anymore. It was an extension of the city itself, a tool of a machine that consumed souls. Alara's purpose solidified. Her quest was no longer just to get her memory back. It was to understand the very nature of the city. The memory stone in her pocket felt like a warm, angry heart. She had to learn what these siphons were and why the city needed them. She had to find a way to get inside. She had to find a way to stop it. And as the siphon began to move again, its metallic hand harvesting the energy from another glowing crystal, Alara knew she had no choice but to follow. Chapter 6. The siphon moved with an unnatural efficiency, a silent predator in a field of ghosts. It didn't follow the terrain. It glided over the crystallized ground, its every movement purposeful and devoid of human hesitation. Alara kept a safe distance, moving from the cover of one jagged crystal formation to the next. The air grew thicker with the metallic tang, and the low hum that vibrated in her bones was louder now, a constant, insidious drone. She realized the siphon wasn't just harvesting the crystals, it was harvesting the stumblers as well. The figure would stop near a shuffling stumbler, its metallic hand hovering. The stumbler would freeze, its body becoming taut, and then the faint, internal glow from its eyes would fade. With a gentle sigh, the stumbler's body would collapse into a fine pile of dust, leaving behind only the tattered clothes. The siphon would then resume its harvest, its own glow a little brighter. The city wasn't just pulling the dead, it was actively consuming them. The shock of this new, terrible knowledge hit Alara like a physical blow. Her grandfather had always said the dead were just lost. He never mentioned that they were eaten. She touched the memory stone in her pocket, and the warm glow seemed to pulse with a furious heat. Was the piece of her soul she'd given up now a part of this monstrous machine? Was her grandfather's peace only temporary, a brief respite before his essence was harvested? She had to get closer. She had to understand. She saw a group of stumblers ahead, their forms obscured by a thick, swirling cloud of dust. The siphon was moving towards them. She used the dust cloud as cover, inching forward until she could see what was happening. But it wasn't the siphon causing the dust cloud. The stumblers were thrashing, their shuffling gait replaced by a frantic, uncoordinated lurching. They were fighting, not each other, but an invisible force. Alara realized they weren't being harvested, they were waking up. A single, ragged word echoed across the deadlands. Not from the stumblers, but from the cloud itself. Run. The voice was hoarse and broken, but it was clear, and it was human. It was a stumbler, or what was left of one, trying to communicate. Alara froze. The siphon, sensing the change, stopped its methodical advance. Its head swiveled, its glowing eyes fixing on the struggling group. A different figure emerged from the dust cloud, a shape that moved with purpose, not a shuffle. This one was hunched, its body scarred with what looked like old wounds. It carried a strange, glowing staff, and it moved with a protective, almost feral instinct, pushing the other stumblers away from the approaching siphon. It was a waker, one of the rare few who had regained a part of their consciousness after being taken by the city's pull. The waker was a legend, a myth whispered by her grandfather around campfires. They were the ones who fought back, who defied the city's hunger. The siphon and the waker locked eyes, a silent challenge in the desolate landscape. Alara knew she had stumbled into a war she never knew existed, a quiet, desperate battle fought between the city's machines and the souls they had stolen. The waker raised its staff, and the ground around the siphon began to crack, glowing with the same eerie light as the memory stones. Alara knew what it was. The waker was using the same power as the rituals, the power of memory and soul, to fight back. But where her grandfather used it to bring peace, this waker was using it to bring a fight. Alara had to make a choice: stay hidden and watch, or reveal herself and choose a side. The fate of her grandfather's memory and her own hung in the balance. Chapter 7. The air crackled with a silent, electric tension. The waker, a figure shrouded in dust and old grief, held its glowing staff aloft. The siphon, an elegant horror of polished metal, stood perfectly still, its internal light a steady, cold burn. The battlefield was the deadlands themselves, and the weapons were memory and will. Alara knew she couldn't simply watch. The stumblers were thrashing in a way she hadn't seen before, their bodies convulsing, a desperate energy coursing through them. This wasn't just a fight, it was an awakening, a chance. She drew her rusted blade, its edge dull from carving wood but sharp with resolve. She moved from behind the crystal formation, her steps light and careful. The siphon's head swiveled toward her with a speed that defied physics. Its glowing eyes, once fixed on the waker, now narrowed, a new, calculating intensity in their light. It saw her not as a threat, but as a resource, a living soul. The waker saw her too. Its head turned, its broken face revealing a single, terrified eye, the other's socket a dark void. It was trying to warn her, to signal for her to run. But Alara had already made her choice. She had to know. She had to learn how this waker could reclaim its life, and she had to learn why the city wanted her. Before the siphon could act, the waker plunged its staff into the ground. A shock wave of pure energy, glowing with the same eerie light as the memory stone, rippled out, knocking the siphon off balance. It stumbled, its graceful form briefly ungainly. "Go," the waker rasped, its voice a tortured whisper. "Leave. It wants you. It wants your core." Alara didn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. The city wasn't just hungry for the dead, it was hungry for the living. It wasn't about the souls of the deceased. It was about the freshness of a living soul, the core that gave it purpose. The memory stone in her pocket felt like a brand. It had taken a piece of her, and now the city wanted the rest. "Help me," Alara shouted back, her voice a jarringly human sound in the desolate landscape. "I need to get inside. I need to know why." The waker seemed to hesitate, its single eye filled with a mix of fury and despair. Then, its gaze fell to the rusted blade in her hand, and something shifted. It saw not a naive girl, but a fighter. It saw a reflection of itself. "Follow me," the waker rasped, turning its back on the siphon. "The conduits, the tunnels. I can show you how to enter. But once inside, you're on your own." The siphon, having regained its balance, lunged. Its metallic hand reached for Alara, its fingers ending in needle-like tips. But the waker was faster. It turned, its movements a blur, and slammed its staff against the ground. The earth erupted, a shower of crystallized fragments flying into the siphon, momentarily blinding it. "Now!" the waker screamed. Alara didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted after the waker, her boots crunching on the dead ground, the hum of the city a maddening chorus in her ears. The waker was leading her to a series of glowing tunnels that snaked from the city's spires, disappearing into the earth. They were the city's veins, the conduits through which it harvested its dreadful energy. The end of the Deadlands and the beginning of her new, desperate journey. Chapter 8. The tunnels were not a part of the natural world. They were impossibly smooth, glowing with a soft, ethereal light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The air inside was cool, sterile, and smelled faintly of ozone and old dust. It was a shocking contrast to the brutal heat and grit of the Deadlands. The waker, a hunched, shuffling specter in the dim light, led the way with a strange confidence. Its movements, once jerky and uncoordinated on the surface, were fluid here. It was home, in a horrifying sort of way. Alara followed close behind, her hand on her rusted blade, the memory stone a reassuring weight in her pocket. She had escaped the siphon, but she knew she was now in the belly of the beast. The waker turned and pointed to the walls. They call these the veins. They carry the essence. The light, it's the collected life force. From the dead, and from the living. It looked at her, its single, terrified eye searching her face. Your kind, your core is brighter, stronger. It will be a feast for the city. Alara felt a wave of revulsion. The beautiful, glowing walls were not just light. They were compressed souls, a river of stolen life force flowing into the city's heart. Why are you here? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why haven't you gone with the others? The waker flinched. I had a name. It was Kale. I had a wife, a child. I died protecting them. The city, it took me, but it did not take all of me. I fought back. I clung to a single memory. He stopped, and with a terrible effort, his scarred face twisted into a semblance of a smile. I remembered the smell of rain on the dust. My wife hated it, but I loved it. I held on to that small piece of myself, and it anchored me. It made me a waker. I am a ghost with a memory, fighting a machine that has none. Alara's own empty chest ached. She had given up her own memory to save her grandfather. Was it gone forever? Or was it now part of this glowing, pulsating nightmare? She had to ask. My grandfather. He died. He was buried with a stone. Is his memory here? Is it a part of this light? Kale turned and looked at her, a profound sadness in his one eye. The stones, they bind the dead to the earth. They give them peace. But the city is greedy. Its pull is stronger than any stone. Eventually, it takes them all. The memory is not lost. It becomes fuel. It becomes this light. It is no longer a memory. It is just power. A low rumble echoed through the tunnels. The hum of the city was a thunderous roar here. The veins around them pulsed with a sudden, violent intensity. A new light, brighter and colder than the others, began to appear ahead of them. It was a blinding white. The core, Kale whispered, his voice trembling. It senses you. It knows you're here. We must hurry. They ran now, the floor of the tunnel slick beneath their boots. The white light was not just ahead. It was coming from the walls themselves, a new set of glowing tubes that branched off from the main veins, thrumming with a terrible energy. Kale saw her fear and gave a broken, bitter laugh. The city feeds on memory, but it consumes it. Your memory of your grandfather's laugh, it is not gone. It is here. It is a part of the machine. It is what gives it its light. It is why you can feel its pull. The truth was a cold, sharp shock. The emptiness inside her was not just loss. It was a physical connection to the monster that had caused all this. She was not just a grieving girl on a quest. She was a living battery, a source of power that the city had already begun to tap. Her journey was not a revenge mission. It was a desperate race to reclaim a piece of her soul before the city took the rest. They reached a large, circular chamber. In the center, a vertical shaft of blinding white light ascended, disappearing into the darkness far above. This was the main conduit, the heart of the city's power. And around it, suspended in the air, were hundreds of shimmering, ethereal shapes. They were not human. They were memories, glowing like fireflies, all drawn toward the light. And among them, a familiar shape, a polished, glowing stone. It was not her grandfather's. It was another. But she knew that somewhere in that vortex of light, a piece of her heart was shining, feeding the very machine she had come to destroy.